All right, today we are diving into something, well, it's pretty dark, but also incredibly fascinating. We're looking at a text that's not just a story, but a kind of philosophical blueprint from Malice. It presents evil as this deliberate, grand architectural project. So, let's get started. So right off the bat, the text hits us with this quote. Now, if the term gay science sounds familiar, it should. It's a direct nod to the philosopher Nietzsche, but it's been twisted, completely perverted. He used it to describe a joyful, life-affirming philosophy. Here, it's the exact opposite. It describes a systematic, almost scientific method for exploring the abyss, the deepest parts of human cruelty. This isn't about random chaos. This is Malice with a very clear methodology.
So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll examine the architect's blueprint to get the big picture. Then, we'll dig into the core method, the science of sloughing. After that, we'll look at the key tool, the alchemical anchor, before we meet the final product, the disguised saint. And finally, we'll face the chilling, irreversible outcome, what's called the new and permanent night.
Okay, let's jump right into our first section, the architect's blueprint. This is the master plan, the conscious architecture of dissent that the entire project is built on.
The central figure here, this Prince of Lies, doesn't see his work as just a bunch of random evil acts. No, he sees it as a single grand design that's been carefully woven into the fabric of our everyday, mundane world. This isn't some demonic invasion from another dimension. It's a subtle corruption from within, a scorner who's already living in the cracks of our reality.
And get this, it's not some vague, abstract plan. It's laid out in 14 distinct stages. Think of it like a 14-chapter manual for dissent. It moves methodically from what it calls the crossroads of doubt all the way to the final stage, the cathedral of anchored blood. It really drives home just how calculated this whole thing is.
Okay, so we have the blueprint, but how does the architect actually build this thing? That brings us to the core method, what the source calls the science of sloughing. This is the engine that drives the whole transformation.
So what on earth is sloughing? Well, imagine systematically stripping away everything that makes someone human in the traditional sense, their morality, their faith, their sense of comfort and virtue. The text presents it as a cruel but necessary refinement, a kind of surgical grace, designed to burn away the superficial shell of civilization to get to what it believes is a raw, primal strength buried underneath.
And why do all this stripping away? What's the goal? It's to uncover this thing called atavism. This is the real prize. Atavism is basically a return to our most primal, ancient instincts. The whole idea is to shatter what the text calls the narrow boundaries of civilized life and morality. This unleashed instinct is framed as the true engine of the entire story.
The process is laid out in 3 pretty chilling steps. First, you strip comfort away from what it calls narrow souls, people living by simple, rigid rules. Second, you deliberately infect the present with chaos to create what it paradoxically calls a future great health. And the final step, the real kicker, you complete the transformation by turning the saint into a predator. So, if sloughing is the how, what about the what with? Let's talk about the tools of the trade, specifically the alchemical anchor. This is how the abstract philosophy becomes a concrete reality.
At the very heart of this whole strategy is the anchor. You gotta think of it like a dark alchemical recipe. Its whole purpose is to take an abstract evil, a heresy, and embed it so deeply into the real world, into the soil, that it becomes a natural, undeniable part of reality.
So how do you forge this anchor? Well, you fuse 2 things that should never go together: righteous blood and demonic essence. It's a brilliant, twisted strategy, right? You use the very symbols of holiness, the vials of the holy, for an unholy purpose. By doing that, the heresy gets camouflaged, making it seem acceptable, even natural.
And this all feeds into the core tactic, what the source calls worldly wisdom. And it's so simple, it's terrifying. The idea is that the invitation to evil is most powerful, most irresistible, when it's disguised in the language of virtue, when it speaks with the tongue of the pious. It's the classic wolf in sheep's clothing, but on a philosophical level.
And here's a perfect example of how that works in the real world. You take a sacred space, an abandoned cathedral. It used to be a community house of prayer, but it gets repurposed, transformed into a private laboratory of the individual, where the ultimate goal isn't worship, but a form of self-creation the text flat out calls witchcraft.
So, we've got the blueprint, the process, and the tools.
But what's the final product? Who is the person that walks out of this dark factory? That brings us to the masterpiece of a whole transformation, the disguised saint.
The text lays out this clear evolution. The person starts out as a wanderer, totally lost in a lightless pit. But then, through this process, they become an undismayed seeker, someone who isn't afraid of that darkness anymore. And finally, they emerge as the disguised saint, the final version who can walk around in broad daylight at high noon, totally unnoticed.
And this final form, wow. It is the absolute pinnacle of the architect's work, a masterpiece of deception. It's a perfect agent of chaos, a being who can, and I quote, inhabit the holy while serving the dark. A true insight agent, working to undermine the very systems of morality and faith from within.
In this whole story, the architect isn't just a villain, he's a guide, a vademecum, which is just a fancy word for a handbook you carry with you. He's reframing the ancient foe, the devil, not as some external enemy to be fought, but as the most useful and honest mirror for humanity to discover its own true, hidden power.
Okay, so the project is complete, the masterpiece is walking among us. What does that mean for the world? What's the endgame? That brings us to the chilling conclusion, the new and permanent night.
Once the project is done, a whole new covenant is established, with its own upside-down moral code. It starts with a sacred no to the shepherd, a total rejection of authority. That's paired with a deep yes to the unmapped road of the self, an embrace of radical individualism. In this new reality, disorder is called the only true harmony. Every act of defiance is a prayer. And the one thing you can't do, the ultimate sin, the one true heresy, is self-ownership, the complete command of your own will, totally free from any moral constraints.
And the text is absolutely clear on this. These changes are not temporary. This isn't a phase. The witching hour has left an indelible stain on the marrow of time. It's a fundamental change to reality itself, something that, as the source says, no morning star can ever wash away.
So this whole blueprint, this summary of the shadows, has successfully created a new reality. It is a map to an invisible kingdom that now operates just beneath the surface of our normal, everyday lives, a hidden power structure reigning beneath the mundane and the moral. And that leaves us with this final, really provocative question. The architect of all this claims his work is just an honest mirror. So, if that's true, what is it reflecting back at us? What hidden, atavistic truths about our own nature does this abyss supposedly reveal? That's the unsettling question the source leaves us to wrestle with.